Hi, welcome back to ABA-ish. I'm Dr. Billy Retzlaff, and today's video is going to be a little more ABA than ish, as this is one of our videos that's geared towards educators, school psychologists, behavior analysts, practitioners, anyone who really completes FBAs and then is responsible for behavior intervention based on those outcomes. So what we're going to be talking about today is some ideas for straightforward intervention that you can use even with really complex functions of behavior. Now, if you haven't checked out my video that looks at alternatives to control and manipulation as functions, I would encourage you to do so. I'll put that in the show notes because those are really the types of functions that I'm talking about today. So, what do we do when we have these larger timescale, more complex functions of behavior? And of course, it's really challenging to address these types of behaviors because of how complex the function is. It's really challenging to know what behaviors to teach a student, to replace those skills, and how to set up the environment in a way that supports alternative behaviors. Part of this is a challenge because a lot of the reinforcers that students contact are from peers in these situations, and so we as the adults don't necessarily control those reinforcers. The other reason this can be really challenging is because the behaviors and their outcomes are incredibly probabilistic, meaning that it's not that every single time the student engages in the behavior that this outcome is produced. Instead, it's only produced some of the time, but that makes it actually more challenging for the individual to discriminate when things have changed, when that behavior is no longer producing the outcome that it used to produce. The added challenge that we have to this is that a lot of students who engage in these types of behaviors are pretty verbal themselves. They have the ability to engage in private or public verbal behavior. And that can keep behavior going. We know that rule governed behavior or behavior that is kind of created by verbal behavior from adults or kids, it will keep going even when the reinforcement changes. So, an example of this is, I could tell you, you need to hit this button as fast as you can, and hitting this button will get you money. And there could be a screen, and you're hitting the button and you're adding money. Now, I could change it, and all of a sudden, hitting the button is no longer producing money. But because I've told you the rule, a lot of people will sit there and hit that button for an incredibly long time because the rule I told them was hit the button. And so, when students create their own rules for how the world works and what's happening around them, that can be an added challenge to addressing these behaviors because they may continue to do things even though we change the environment. So, all of this is not to say that we should give up and not try to address these behaviors, but to let you know that it is really challenging to address these complex behaviors. We're going to have to come at it from a lot of different angles, and I'm going to quickly share with you what those angles are in today's video. So, the first and maybe the most important one is that we need to make sure we're doing a basic and mental health needs assessments for these kids. There is a very clear correlation between students who have basic and mental health needs that are not being met and these more complex, challenging types of behaviors. So, we need to be looking at, is the student have secure housing? Are they experiencing food instability? Is there other types of basic needs that are not being met? As well as what are their mental health needs. If the student is experiencing depression or anxiety and not getting support for those needs, we need to create ways to get those supports, those needs met in order to effectively help them. If you have a student who has basic and mental health needs that are going unmet, the likelihood that you're able to make progress with them, it's not zero, but it's much, much lower. So a really good use of your resources is to first look into what are their basic and mental health needs and create a plan that addresses any identified needs that you can. The next thing we want to focus on is making sure that we have a welcoming and supportive environment. For a lot of these students, schools or situations in which adults are telling them what to do or how to behave are really aversive situations. They're not situations that they're comfortable in, they don't enjoy them, and so they are going to avoid or engage in negative behaviors in any way that they can to make those experiences more welcoming and more positive. So, as a school or as a therapist or whatever type of setting you're in, we need to set up a welcoming and a supportive environment. The number one piece to this is making sure that we're giving more of our energy toward positives than negatives. If you don't know what I mean by this, go check out my videos talking about energies, caregiver energy use, and energy continuums, because that is critical for these students. They need to see all of the good coming from their good behavior and that it's very low key when their behavior is inappropriate. We need to make sure we have an accepting space. A lot of these students are looking for acceptance, so we talked about increase or maintenance of social status as a reinforcer for some kids. That's because that helps them feel accepted and welcome, which opens their doors to a ton of other types of reinforcers. So if we want to compete with that, we need to make sure the space that we control is also an accepting space. It cannot be judgmental or negative. It has to be a place where they feel really welcomed. We need to be offering choice when that's appropriate. That's part of being that welcoming and supportive environment, of letting them take that autonomy where and when it's appropriate, and also making sure that those academic and social supports are in place for the students as needed. So we want them to be successful in our environment. We don't want to be having a student show up who hasn't been in our classroom for a long time, and all of a sudden we give them a test that there's no way that they're going to pass, because that's not going to make them feel welcome. It's not an appropriate academic support. It doesn't mean any of these things. We really need to focus on making our spaces feel welcoming and supportive, even to the students who are a little bit challenging to interact with sometimes. Another thing we need to really focus on is being student goal oriented. So help the students identify their own goals. Those goals could be small things like, maybe they have a goal to make a new friend, to go to a birthday party, to experience fun play on a playground with kids, right? Something very simple. But for a lot of students, it can be something a little bit bigger than that. They might have a goal to graduate, to get a job, to move out of their parents' house. They might have a goal to have a car or to get their license. Whatever it is, you need to help the students identify their own goals and then teach them how they can self monitor those goals. So, self monitoring is actually a really effective intervention in and of itself if we can teach kids to set a goal and track their own progress on that goal. So, of course, you have to support that. You have to teach them how to self monitor. You have to make sure they're doing it accurately. But if we can focus on that autonomy, that tends to be really helpful for these types of students. And whenever we can, we want to relate any appropriate behavior that we're seeing to those goals. So, how is this appropriate behavior that you're doing going to serve you when you get that job? How is practicing taking this test going to help you get your driver's license? Whatever it is, we're going to, as much as possible, tie appropriate behavior to those student goals. Now, all of that is not to say that we're not going to have structure and that we're not going to have expectations of our students. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We're going to set very clear expectations and make sure that we have known responses should those expectations not be met. Again, the goal here is to keep our energy low when a rule is broken. So we need to make sure that students know exactly what is expected of them and exactly how our adults will respond should they not meet those expectations. Visuals here can be an extremely helpful tool. They serve as reminders both to the students and the adults what the expectations are, but they can also be used to decrease the back and forth during challenging situations. So, a lot of times I see students and adults get into power struggles, right? They get into these situations where they're going back and forth over and over again about how or when or why or what. It doesn't really matter what that argument is about, they're just getting that back and forth struggle happening. And so if instead we can rely on a visual, which is this was the expectation, this is what happened when the expectation is not met, that allows us to decrease that back and forth, which is extremely important. The other key to this is that we have to be consistent across adults. It cannot be that some adults have one set of expectations and other adults have different sets of expectations, because in those situations, you run into students pitting adults against each other. That's when you hear, well, Miss Billy told me, well, so and so said, and that becomes incredibly challenging. And so we have to make sure that all the adults are on the same page with what our expectations are, as well as what our responses should those expectations not be met. This is a time that making a continuum that gives clear responses that everyone can realistically follow is crucial. So if you need more support on understanding how to make that continuum, go check out my video on intervention beyond extinction because I give some good examples there of how you can do that. Again, the purpose of that continuum is to make sure all the adults know exactly how they're supposed to respond to different types of student behavior. We also want to make sure that we have effective teaching in place, including direct teaching of social skills. So, effective teaching is really important because we need to have these engaging and interactive lessons so that students want to engage. I am a behavior analyst by trade. I am not a teacher by trade, so I'm not here to tell teachers how to teach. But I will say I have worked with some really amazing teachers who do these great, engaging, and interactive lessons. And it is so much easier for me to support the behavior of students in their classroom compared to teachers who just sit down and talk at a student and then expect them to complete a worksheet. So I know that sometimes, lessons have to look a certain way to accomplish a goal, but as much as you can, have engaging and interactive lessons, give students chances to respond and to be part of that. Whenever possible, have there be choice in, what the student is learning or how they're learning it or how they're showing you that they learned it. So, maybe for example, you have a student who wants to be a YouTuber. That's their goal, is to become a YouTube star. Is there a way that they can do their final project in the form of a YouTube video instead of writing an essay on it? What can you do to offer them choice so that they have some of that autonomy and that say over what it's looking like while they're still learning the material that you need them to learn? Now, for direct teaching of social skills, you need to think pretty broadly. But like I said, it's direct teaching. It's not thinking they're going to pick it up or they'll see it modeled and that'll be enough. This needs to be lessons that are taught all the time, really focused on what are the social skills we need to replace all of these inappropriate behaviors. So some examples might include like self-regulation skills. So when I'm starting to get frustrated, what can I do instead? Conflict resolution strategies. This is really important for kids who have behavior that's maintained by avoiding negative interactions. You need to teach them a different way to avoid those interactions or to resolve them. Perspective taking is another one in that realm of teaching them to understand the perspective of other people and how that impacts their behavior can be really helpful. If you have students who are engaging in inappropriate behavior in order to increase the likelihood that people will follow their requests, teaching them how to appropriately self advocate. So, not to self advocate for things that don't forward their educational process, but what can they ask for to help them? What can they ask for to get their needs met so that they can do what they need to do, but in a way that is comfortable for them? The same with, I like to teach those kids how to effectively negotiate. People always say, oh, he's going to be a lawyer someday as a negative. I think that's a huge positive. Let's teach these students effective negotiation. How do you recognize when somebody is done negotiating and you need to take a break or you need to stop pushing your point? Negotiation is a give and take. And if we can teach them those effective skills, that is going to help them more in the long run than if we just say, hey, you're never going to get what you want, right? So teach them to self advocate, teach them to effectively negotiate. Okay, so to quickly recap, when you have a student with those really complex behavior functions, you need to make sure that you're focusing on those basic and mental health needs assessments. You're having a welcoming and supportive environment. You're supporting student goal exploration and then making sure that everything you do is oriented towards those goals. That as a consequence, you have clear expectations and known responses. So that consequence plan portion is the student knows how you're going to respond to their inappropriate behavior, and so does everyone else, so that you can be consistent across adults. And finally, have effective teaching in place, including that really targeted direct social skills teaching. Give them something that's going to replace what they are gaining from those inappropriate behaviors. Hopefully, this was helpful. And if it was, please subscribe and share and come on back to see some more information about different types of intervention as well as the FBA process if that's of interest to you. Thanks.